Thanks for clicking. Welcome to another Knowledge Math production. Today we're going to be talking about adding and subtracting fractions. Okay, we're going to work with fractions that have like denominators and unlike denominators. We'll remind you of how to work with those. So let's take a look and see what we have. We'll talk about equivalent fractions and some other things. So let's first talk about equivalent fractions because we're going to need equivalent fractions to make common denominators. So we've made equivalent fractions before. So for example, if I had a fraction of 1/3 and I wanted to make an equivalent fraction, you can multiply or divide this fraction by the same number in the numerator and the denominator, and you'd make a fraction that has the same value as the 1/3. So let's say I multiplied the numerator and denominator by 4. So then 4/12 is an equivalent fraction to 1/3. And again, if I reduce 4/12, put it in lowest terms, divide both of them by 4, well, yeah, I get 1/3. So 4/12 and 1/3 are the same. Down here, we have the same idea, 1/3 and 2/6. If I multiplied the numerator and denominator both by 2, I would get 2/6. 2/6 is the same as 1/3. Okay, so we're going to need that to add and subtract fractions. All right. The most important thing about adding and subtracting fractions is that you cannot just add across the numerator and the denominator. Okay? You cannot do that. This is not true. All right? It is not 2/6. Okay? The denominators must be the same to add or subtract fractions. Okay? You should never add or subtract the denominators. All right, so first of all, let's talk about like denominators. So fractions that have the same denominator are like fractions. These fractions are like 1/4 and 3/4 because they both have a 4 as the denominator. These are the easiest types of fractions to add and subtract. Okay, to add fractions with like denominators, all you do is keep the denominator the same and then just add or subtract the numerators. So if I have 1/6 plus 4/6, that leaves me with a denominator of 6, and 1 plus 4 is 5. My answer is 5/6. I can't write this. It's already in lowest terms, so that's my answer. Down here, we have 1/10 plus 7/10. The denominator stays at 10. 1 plus 7 is 8. It gives me 8/10. But now I can write this in lowest terms, right? I can divide each one of these by 2. That would give me 4/5. So my answer here is 4/5. I'm not looking for 8/10. I'm looking for 4/5. I'm looking for that fraction in lowest terms. All right. That's the easiest type of fraction to work with. So if I have 17/24 plus 11/24, you should try it. Keep my denominator at 24. 17 and 11 is 28. But now there's a number that goes into both, right? Hopefully you find the largest one. The largest number that divides in evenly is 4. So that's 7/6. Or you can also write this as a mixed number. 6 goes into 7 one whole time with 1 remaining, and it would be 1 1/6. Either one of these we will accept. Okay, the 28/24 we will not accept. All right, it's not in lowest terms. Okay, when you write it in lowest terms, you can write the improper fraction or the mixed number. All right, to subtract fractions with like denominators, you do the same thing. Okay, as long as the denominators are the same, you just keep the denominator the same and then subtract the top or the numerator. 5 minus 1 is 4. 4/8. 4 divides in evenly to both. I can put it in lowest terms. 1/2. All right, same thing down here. 15 is my denominator. 11 minus 6 is 5. And then 5 is in common in both. Gives me 1/3. Okay, subtracting fractions with like denominators. All right, now, what if I wanted to add fractions that have unlike denominators? The first thing you need to do is find a common denominator. So 1/2 plus 1/4, the denominators are not the same. All right, there are 2 different ways to go about doing this. Okay, there are 2 different ways to go about finding a common denominator. You can find the least common multiple between these 2 numbers. that would be your least common denominator. Or you can multiply the two denominators together. That will give you a common denominator, but you may have to then reduce that common denominator and put the fraction in lowest terms at the end. All right, I'm going to show you both ways. So the first way is to find the least common multiple. So the least common multiple between 2 and 4 is 4, right? 4 goes into itself, and 2 also goes into 4. So I'm going to change each one of these fractions into a denominator of 4. Now, I need an equivalent fraction to 1/2 with a denominator of 4. I'd have to multiply by 2 on the numerator and denominator. It would give me 2/4. Plus, down here, the 1/4, I just multiply by 1. So this fraction stays the same. 2/4 plus 1/4. Now my denominator is common. I'll write it down. 2 plus 1 is 3. 3/4 is my fraction, okay? That's the sum of 1/2 and 1/4. That's one way to do it. The other way to do it is this way, and I'll show you here. They both do the same thing. One of them takes an extra step. So let's say you couldn't find the least common multiple. You're like, I don't know what it is. These numbers are really difficult. You could multiply the two numbers together, the two denominators. 2 times 4 is 8. So that means 8 will be a common denominator. It may not be the least common denominator, but at least it's a common denominator. All right, so then you can continue. So now I'm going to make some equivalent fractions. 2 times 4 will give me 8, so 1 times 4 is 4. And then I'm going to add to that. 4 times 2 is 8. 1 times 2 is 2. So now I'm going to add 4/8 plus 2/8. The denominator is an 8. 4 plus 2 is 6. And now you might be thinking, well, wait a minute. These answers aren't the same. But they are the same, because 6/8 is not in lowest terms. So I can divide the 6 and the 8 both by 2. It gives me 3/4. So these answers are the same. It's just that if you choose to multiply the two denominators together, you might get the least common denominator if you get lucky. If you don't get lucky, you don't get the least common denominator, and then you have to put your fraction in lowest terms to get your final answer. Both of them will work. One of them may involve an extra step. Okay? All right, here's another one. 1/2 plus 2/3. So I'm going to write them vertically. I tend to write it vertically. Okay, I'm going to make a common denominator. I am always going to find the least common denominator, but if you want to multiply the two denominators, you can. In this case, the least common denominator is 6. 6 is the number that 2 and 3 both divide evenly in, right? It's the first number that they both have in common. So I'm going to multiply the top fraction by 3 to make an equivalent fraction, 3/6, and the bottom one by 2. That's 4/6. In total, that's 7/6. Okay? Or 1 and 1/6. Take your pick. So there's my answer for that one. Okay, now if you chose to multiply the 2 and 3, hey, you got 6, right, as your common denominator, and that's okay. It happens to be the least common denominator, so you would have gotten 7/6 as well. All right, so now here's a few for you to try. We got 2/8 plus 1/3. Now this 2/8, there's a couple ways you can deal with it. You could put it in lowest terms right now, and then instead of adding the 2/8 with 1/3, you could do 1/4 plus 1/3. That's certainly a possibility. You can do that if you want. Or you could just leave it as 2/8. I'm just going to leave it as 2/8 plus 1/3. And I'm looking for a common denominator. Okay, the first number that 3 and 8 both divide evenly into would be 24, I think. So this top fraction I'm going to multiply by 3 to make that equivalent fraction, 6/24. And the bottom one I'm going to multiply by 8. So that's 8. That's in total. That's 14/24. That's 14/24, but that has to be reduced. 2 goes in evenly to both. 7/12. That's my answer, 7/12. Now, I would have gotten 7/12 had I reduced this fraction at the beginning and put it in lowest terms. All right. So either way, you're going to have to reduce this fraction if it's not in lowest terms. Either you do it at the end or you do it at the beginning. Okay, now we have 1/2 plus 7/8. So again, I'm looking for that least common denominator. In this case, between 2 and 8, it's a 16. So I'm going to multiply the top fraction by 8. Gives me 8 up top. Multiply by 2 on the bottom. Gives me 14 on the bottom. 8 and 14 is 22 over 16. Oh, wait. I didn't find the least common denominator because 2 divides in evenly to each one of these. So that's 11 over 8. Or I can write it as a mixed number, 1 and 3/8. Okay. What would have been the common denominator for the 2 and the 8? It would have been 8, right? The least common denominator would have been 8. That's what I should have picked. And then I would have got 11 over 8 right away. All right, let's try 1/3 plus 7 over 9. Okay, least common denominator here is going to be a 9. So the top fraction I'm going to multiply by 3. And the bottom fraction I'm going to multiply by 1. And 3 plus, keep it as a 9. 3 and 7 make 10. That's 10 over 9, or 1 and 1/9. Okay, those are my answers for those three. Hopefully you got them right. All right, subtracting is the same thing. So to subtract two fractions, I need to find a common denominator. 8 over 12 minus 1/5. So now here, in this example, I actually think it's advantageous to find the least or the fraction in lowest terms because it makes the 12 smaller, and then maybe it'll be easier to find the common denominator. So 8 over 12 in lowest terms, I divide them both by 4, gives me 2 over 3. So now I'm going to do 2 over 3 minus 1/5. And now my common denominator should be easy to find. It's a 15. So I'm going to multiply this top fraction by 5 and the bottom fraction by 3. That's 7 over 15. There's my answer. All right, then we have 7 over 11 minus 1/3. So my common denominator this time is 33. It's actually when you multiply the 11 and the 3. So that's a 21. And then times 11 here and here. That's 11. That is 10 over 33. And there's my answer. And then we have 6 over 9 minus 2 over 5. I could reduce the 6 over 9 if I want to. So why don't I do that? I'm going to make that, divide both of them by 3. That's going to give me 2/3 minus 2/5. And now my common denominator is 15 again. So 3 times 5 will give me a 15. 2 times 5 gives me 10. The most common mistake here, as you can imagine, is forgetting to multiply the numerator by that number. So 10 minus 6 is 4 over 15. There's my answer. And then here's 3 more for you to try. Give them a shot, see how you do. 2/3 minus 1/6. Common denominator is a 6. Multiply the top fraction by 2 and the bottom fraction by 1. 4 minus 1 is 3 over 6. Right? So that's 3 over 6. 3 over 6, that reduces by 3 to 1/2. 6 over 10 minus 4 over 8. So here's one where I would definitely reduce the fraction. You got two fractions that can be reduced and put in lowest terms. I might as well do that for each one of them. Divide the bottom one by 4, gives me 1/2. The top fraction I can divide by 2. It gives me 3/5. So 3/5 minus 1/2. Common denominator is a 10. So I'll multiply the top fraction by 2 now. It gives me 6 over 10. So I'm back to 6 over 10 again. Multiply the bottom one by 5, 5 over 10, which leaves me with 1 over 10. And then finally, we have 2 over 8 minus 1 over 6. 2 over 8, I'd probably change that into 1/4. So that's 1/4 minus 1/6. Common denominator this time is a 12. So the bottom fraction gets multiplied by 2. Top one gets multiplied by 3. And that gives me 1 over 12. That's my answer for that one. And that's how we add and subtract fractions with like and unlike denominators. And that's it. And as always, thanks for clicking.